And welcome to an India Today special broadcast that comes to you from southern Israel. I'm Gaurav Sawant. This part of Israel is seeing intensification of conflict. Even as we speak, you can hear not just massive military movement that's happening behind me, but also the boom of 155 howitzers that are going off from this side and rockets that continue to pound this place. Rockets that come from Hamas controlled Gaza Strip. Even on day 7 of the conflict between Israel and Hamas, the terrorist organization retains the capability to strike and strike hard between Sderot, where we are, and Ashkelon, which is just behind me. You have multiple rocket attacks from Hamas held territory, which is actually disrupting Israel's movement to an extent to the forward areas. Of course, only occasionally. The Iron Dome system effectively has taken down most of those rockets, but people have been asked to move to safer areas. But earlier today, I was at the front lines of this conflict where there was a massive movement of Israel's armored columns from the Merkava tanks to the infantry combat vehicles to troop carriers. We bring you this ground report.
The India Today team right now is at the front lines of this conflict. These are the powerful Merkava tanks of the Israeli army, and these tanks have now been mobilized. We are right at the front lines. Watch around me as the howitzers, the tanks and the infantry combat vehicles of the Israeli army are all slowly getting mobilized, and all of it is happening right here with the flag of the Israeli army being prepared. The mobilization has already taken place and the forces are now moving forward. Their deployment, their locations constantly being changed, and an element of surprise is taking on. They are moving forward very, very quickly, very capable And now the moment those instructions are given, Israeli forces will move in. India today is right at the front lines of this battle in West Asia, getting you the latest reports. We were the first to show you how air attacks were intensifying, how artillery was pounding Hamas bases, how armor was moving forward, and now how these infantry combat vehicles, and behind them the special forces locked and loaded, ready to go and decimate the Hamas terror. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the army chief, they've both been very clear. This country is on the same page with one objective. That one objective is to completely decimate the Hamas and ensure that Gaza Strip can never be used to launch terror attacks on this part of Israel. The southernmost part of Israel remains most vulnerable. But despite all this movement, despite the air attacks and the artillery pounding, ground troops will have to go in, because even now Hamas retains the capacity to strike. Rocket attacks have been happening inside Israel. Even yesterday till very late at night, we were near Sridot and rocket attacks were happening, though the Iron Dome was able to interdict and destroy most of the incoming rockets in the sky itself. But a couple of rockets did fall, one close to a hospital, one on the road harmlessly, but at the same time the threat of rocket attacks still remains. We've been speaking for the past half an hour, and even before we got here, the armor movement was happening. Mechanized infantry columns have been moving, the special forces have been moving, the ground forces have been moving, and all in full public flow. This just shows how massive is Israel's response going to be. One of the officers we spoke to told us that this is the fastest ever mobilization in the history of Israel, with 300,000 soldiers, with 3 lakh soldiers being mobilized in a couple of days, battle ready, locked and loaded and ready to go. That's exactly what Israel intends to do. This is day 7 of the deadly terror attack launched by Hamas, in which 1,200 people were massacred, more than 1,200, and more than 3,000 injured. Israel is still counting its losses, but resolute in its will and decision to decimate Hamas and ensure that the Gaza Strip no longer poses a threat. Hamas no longer poses a threat to people living in this part of Israel. Gaurav Sawant in southern Israel for India Today.
The Hamas terrorist attack on Israel took place with military precision. An eye on detail. For example, when hundreds of terrorists came into the Israeli territory, whether in pickup trucks or in minivans armed to the teeth, there were other vans that followed full of ammunition. They were loaded to the teeth, armed to the teeth, and they had replenishments. They didn't have to go back to the Gaza Strip to get more ammunition. Vehicles carrying ammunition came with them. Additional rifles, their medical teams also came with them. But that's just one part of the story. Look at how they're making rockets. Open source intelligence. India Today's open source intelligence now is in a position to reveal that Hamas terrorists planned for this massive terror strike for close to 2 years, from training of the terrorists on use of power gliders to getting rockets in place, to have more than 5,000 rockets being fired in this area just a couple of hours, and then continuing with those rocket attacks even on day 7 goes on to show the intensity of the preparations. That's not all. The terrorists had also all along planned to take hostages. We bring you more in this report.
Civilians paying the highest price in the Israel-Hamas conflict. The terrorist group initiated it. Ordinary Israelis targeted, maimed and killed when Hamas launched its unprecedented guerrilla-style terrorist incursion into Israeli territory on October the 7th. Civilians in Gaza plunged into a crisis as the Israeli military bombs their territory, choking supplies to the tiny enclave, home to 2 million residents. On its part, Hamas has sought to portray civilian casualties as accidental, collateral damage. In statements issued to local outlets, the Hamas claims its so-called Palestinian freedom fighters aim to avoid targeting ordinary Israelis. Evidence, however, suggests otherwise. A purported 14-page operational document discovered on a Hamas operative's body within a pickup truck by first responders has been shared by an online group of first responders. Labeled top secret, apparently by Hamas, the document suggests attacks on civilians were part of a well-thought-out plan. A plan the Palestinian terror group hatched as early as October 2022. The strategy, as explained in the document, involved raiding Israeli settlements called kibbutz, the assault to be led by a commander, and 2 squads, each consisting of 5 attackers. The raids on the kibbutz, which are basically self-contained communities, carried out with precision. Now take a closer look at point 7. Hamas operatives, led by their commanders, specifically instructed to take soldiers and residents as hostages for negotiations later. A section in the same document noted potential presence of approximately 1,000 civilians in another Israeli settlement along the Gaza Strip. Survivors recount the horror they witnessed firsthand when the Hamas invaded Israeli territory briefly last Saturday. Many civilians accuse the Israeli government of failure.
I want answers from the government. It's not possible. My service was there. There was always people prepared for things like that because it's the nightmare of all the soldiers there. It's not possible. The party was authorized by the IDF and by the police. This is something, it's not an accident. There's something more serious happening here. And we want answers to our questions from the government.
Hamas's planning dossier provides a detailed insight into the intentions behind the attack. 150 hostages currently in Hamas custody in the Gaza Strip. A plan written, drafted on paper, and executed on the ground. With Ankit Kumar, Bureau Report, India Today.
After more than 1,200 innocent Israelis were killed in the Hamas terror attack, one would have thought that the entire world would have united to condemn not just the terror attack, but also Hamas as a terrorist organization. But sadly, that isn't true. It's not just in the Middle East or pockets around where there are several who are standing with the Hamas against Israel, but then there are also areas in Europe and in the United States of America. For example, in France, there were protests in favor of the terrorists, it seems. Also, protests on university campuses in the United States of America. Clearly, there's a big battleground in the world, even as you see these images behind me of Israeli army movement and massive Israeli army movement that is taking place towards the borders here.
The war between Israel and Hamas has left the world divided. Protests have erupted across the globe. Some are supporting Israel, others are in solidarity with Palestinians. After Sydney illuminated the Opera House in the colors of the Israeli flag, hundreds of Palestinians marched to the iconic building with flares and set Israeli flags on fire. Anti-Semitic slogans were also raised. The United States is on alert. Campuses in America have become flashpoints with protests over Israel-Hamas war raging on. At the Columbia University, 2 groups of students, one backing Israel and another supporting Palestine, faced off.
People in Israel are suffering. Our family in Israel is suffering tremendously. I mean, you know, we take for granted here in America that we have schools. We send our kids to schools. We send our kids to synagogues. We just live a free life. And it's starting to change over here. Things are getting very scary over here, and we're starting to feel a little bit of how they feel every single day over there, threatened.
Today, I feel like that CUNY, they need to be more responsible. They need to speak up for Palestine. They need to condemn what Israel is doing. It's not okay. And we have so many years of history that is just completely being ignored. And I feel like that by speaking up today, we can really bring a change.
Their ability to launch thousands of missiles.
While university officials blocked public access to the campus, many took to the streets of New York. Several hundred people defied a police ban and demonstrated in Paris to denounce Israel's military actions in Gaza. Many wore Palestinian flags around their shoulders and chanted, "We are all Palestinians." Riot police later sprayed tear gas and water cannons, chasing the crowd away. France has now banned pro-Palestine rallies.
Palestine will be free! Palestine will be free!
Pro-Palestinian protesters also staged demonstrations outside the US consulate in Johannesburg. Hundreds of demonstrators gathered in the heart of Brussels in a powerful show of support for Palestine. The crowd carried Palestinian flags, images of the bombardment in Gaza, pictures of children and journalists who were killed, and chanted, "Freedom for Palestine." Rallies took place in the capitals of South Korea and Japan too. In South Korea's capital, Seoul, outside the Israeli embassy, hundreds of people staged a rally to denounce Israel for what they called oppression of Palestinians. Some demonstrators gathered near the Israeli embassy in Japan to call for an end to Israel's bombing of Gaza. Many of them carried placards written in English and Japanese, calling for peace and an end to the violence. The century-old conflict has created new fault lines in an already fractured world. Bureau Report, India Today.
The situation on ground here in southern Israel remains extremely tense. There's massive movement. As you can see right behind me, Israeli forces are moving right to the front lines. But then the police and other forces are also protecting the interior areas, whether it's areas around the Zikkim beach or in Ashkelon. The threat is not just from the Hamas rockets. The threat is also from power gliders and Hamas terrorists with assault rifles coming in to carry out more terror strike, harming not just Israeli civilians, but also Israeli forces as they move in big numbers towards the borders. We will continue to track developments on this big story, but that is all I have for you on this special broadcast that comes to you from Sderot in southern Israel, as you hear the boom of this gunfire, these howitzers that are pounding almost relentlessly. We will continue to report from ground zero, but for the moment, many thanks for watching, and for all the latest news and updates, keep watching India Today.